All right, everybody, thank you for coming to day one of Wild West Hacking Fest. Oh, and Velda's got my speaking notes. Round of applause for Velda. All right, so happy Cinco de Mayo. So with this, once again, the staff is wearing the specific shirts. There was a hideous Hawaiian shirt here. This thing. So hold on. Nice. I feel like I'm wearing my grandmother's curtains. It actually feels like my grandmother's curtains. There are also people in the conference wearing these hideous shirts. They can help you with anything but fashion sense. So once again, as far as Wi-Fi, we're keeping the Wi-Fi clear so we can stream it. We're streaming this for all of our virtual attendees. We have something like 400 people streaming this from home. Once again, we wanted to keep this conference so it was safe for people that wanted to come locally, and then if somebody wasn't comfortable, they could still take part in it as well. Tonight, we're going to be doing BHIS Talking About News tonight from 7 until 8 in track 3. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to be getting up with a bunch of people. We're going to go running at 6:45 at the hotel entrance. And then I would also like to point out, we have an escape room. If you look at your map, it's kind of off the beaten path. I think it's in Tower 1 on the first floor. There is an escape room, so check that out. Also, all of our labs are getting set up right now on the other side of that wall. We have a ton of hands-on labs. If you ever wanted to do RFID hacking, it's there. If you want to do wireless hacking, it's there. We have ADHD, we have Rita, we have all kinds of things ready to go. So please take advantage of all the hands-on that you can possibly do there, because there's a lot actually going on. I also wanted to take a few moments and introduce Derek Rook. And I want to tell you a little bit of background with me and Derek Rook and our relationship. I actually met Derek Rook. He was TAing for me at a SANS conference. And so I retired from the SANS Institute a number of years ago. And Derek is one of the main reasons why I decided to retire from SANS. No, it's absolutely true. It's absolutely true.
I'm so sorry.
When I was teaching for a long time, it was all about building up an instructor core that I could leave and there would be people that would keep 504 in good hands. And I remember teaching with Derek and I'm like, well, this guy's just way smarter than I am. And he just absolutely did a fantastic job teaching 504. And that was the first inkling that I had where I was like, I can move on. I can kind of go off into the ether in the west and just kind of disappear into the woods, grow a beard and get weird. And this kind of brings up something I know some of you have heard me say on webcasts. One of my goals in life is to be forgotten, go off and be forgotten. And I was listening to an author the other day who kind of solidified that idea for me. You have a lot of people that talk about their legacy. What is their legacy? How will they be remembered? And this one author that I was listening to on a podcast really summed it up for me. He said, the best thing for an author is to be forgotten. And that resonated. And the reason why he said that is because if you write a book and years from now, no one remembers that book, it means that book is no longer necessary. I want you to think of 1984 by George Orwell. Is that book still necessary? Brave New World, is that book still necessary? To Kill a Mockingbird, is that book still necessary? So whenever I talk about computer security, if somebody asks me, if the world was a secure place and all of a sudden tomorrow you couldn't do computer security, how would you feel? I would feel great if all of us in this room could do other careers. And like I said, with Derek, when I saw him teach 504 and teach it brilliantly, I knew that that was a time when I could start stepping away and begin the process of trying to be forgotten, because there's people that are coming up that are amazing. So constantly be looking for those people, constantly be looking for a platform to give those people, because ultimately, hopefully, all of us, when it comes to computer security, we can be forgotten in some regard at some point in the future. So with that, Derek Rook. There you go.
Thanks, John. Velda, I want to add to my writer that John can't introduce me anymore. because I feel like I can't ever live up to any of his introductions. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for being here. Welcome to San Diego. I'm sure your flight crew welcomed you, but I don't think they have the authority to do so, so I'm doing it now. Welcome. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm super happy that you're here, because this is, I don't know about you, but this is my first conference in a couple of years. Deadwood Wild West Hackin Fest is my favorite conference, and when John and Velda told me they wanted to bring it to San Diego, I got super, super excited. And then something happened. I forget what it was, but a couple years later, we're all here, and this is super great. So we'll get into my talk in a second, but the theme of this conference is You Hacked My Battleship. So I want to play a game just real quick with everybody. And the people at home can play this too. If you're in person, it's a little harder. So what we're going to say is if the term is a nautical term, raise one hand. If it's a cyber term, raise two. And in the chat, you can just put in which you think it is. Ready? Everybody? If it's both, raise three hands. Okay, so initially I wanted to make this talk like entirely nautical themed, and I realized despite growing up in San Diego, I don't know anything about boats. So the terms I came up with ports, and the other one I came up with scallywags. So if I work that into the talk later, that can be our little inside joke, and that's the other like nautical themed stuff. But that concludes all of the sea talk for the rest of the talk. So moving on. Mostly usual disclaimer. So the whole like my thoughts and opinions don't reflect those of my employer. Sure. This talk's a little bit different because I actually wrote this talk between two employers. So at the time of writing this, I didn't have an employer to reflect. So if you hear anything that's like, oh, I think that's this employer, I think that's that employer, it's not. I'm also going to be jumbling events and timelines a little bit so that, you know, sometimes you'll hear, oh, in 2017 we did this. May not have actually happened in 2017. Please don't crawl my LinkedIn and like pinpoint like, oh, that's this company, that's that company. Okay, great. Can I get everybody's agreement on that? Yeah, great, cool, excellent. Next question, less funny, hopefully. What is offensive security's job at a company? What does offensive security do? And I'm just going to take a second. I want everybody to kind of reflect on this. What is the point of offensive security at a company? I think what a lot of people, and hopefully more non-offensive security people than offensive security people, but I think a lot of people are going to say, oh, well, it's to hack things. It's to find vulnerabilities. It's to find weak points in a company's business processes or information systems. It's to identify gaps in process. Not really. That's stuff we do, but that's not what our job is. Our job and retain profitable customers. That's everyone's job. Now, if you work at a nonprofit, awesome, great. I'm super proud of you. You have a slightly different job. But if you work for a for-profit company, this is what our job is. How we do that depends on what your job title is, what your job description is. We all do it a little bit differently. We all have different secondary objectives, but our job is really to make our company better and make it more attractive to people, to make it more attractive to customers, making it more profitable, et cetera. So whenever I talk about offensive security, whenever I'm discussing things with executives, it's important to realize that you need to put what you're trying to accomplish in terms that the people who are signing your checks will understand and appreciate. And that has a lot to do with building partnerships and getting stakeholders on board to let you hack things, to let you bring off the new cool hack, to buy the new technology that you really want to buy and things like that. So I'm gonna reference this point a few times throughout the talk, but it's really, really important to remember, to understand that our job is to make the company make money easier. So let's move on to actually the body of the talk now that we've got some context and some pretext set up. So in 2015, I was working as a security engineer doing security operations, doing a little bit of, excuse me while I do a little inappropriate removal of clothing here. It's warm up here. I was doing a little bit of tool development, a little bit of security automation, things like that. But what I really, really wanted to do is I wanted to be a professional hacker. I didn't have any experience. I didn't really have a background. I came out of systems administration. This was my first security job even, but I really wanted to hack stuff. I started doing, I forget when Hack the Box was it 2016? I started doing Hack the Box. There were a couple other like online sites that you could do some cool hacking stuff on, but none of it professionally. And I wanted to figure out a way to get my company to allow me to do it more professionally. I actually pitched the idea of having an offensive security team. I said, hey, wouldn't you guys like to have on staff full-time hackers? And they said, no, we wouldn't. That doesn't sound good at all. We'd like you to do your job, please. And I was like, well, okay, I guess that's fair. So I started thinking about what my job was. Right, what my job actually was. And I have this super trick question in the beginning that our job is to help, keep the company profitable. But how we accomplish that job is different depending on what our tasks are. And in security, the way that we help make our company more profitable is that we make our company safer for our customers. We make our company safer for the employees. We help refine business processes so they're less risky. We help protect critical information assets, things like that. And I was thinking, how can we really move the needle there, and how can I incorporate offensive security into that process? Well, this company had some security awareness processes, as I'm sure most of your companies do. The difference about this company is that we didn't have anything pre-recorded. We actually held quarterly security awareness seminars the security team would put on, and we'd take current events and help educate our users about the current events. And I said, one of the biggest problems we have is that our password practices are awful. And I'm sure no one else's company's password practices are awful, but ours were. And I was thinking, how could we address that? And I started thinking to myself, why do people make such terrible passwords? Well, one, passwords are awful. The whole concept is terrible. But really, it's that they don't understand the inherent risks behind things. All they hear us all day say, make complex passwords, and if you don't, you'll get eaten by goblins or something. Like, we don't actually give them any reasons. We don't give them any background. We don't explain what bad passwords even mean. So I decided, for this security awareness topic, I was going to actually do a live password cracking session for the company. And I'd say, hey, this is how it works. I took a series of passwords from a computer. I said, this is how hackers generally grab password hashes or different representations of passwords. This is one of the common tools that we use. We can do brute forcing, and it's like this, and it's actually pretty slow. We can do dictionary attacks, and this is much faster, and this is kind of where you get dictionaries, and these are kind of the things that are on them. And I said, but what really the jam is mutation rules. And so what we do is we take dictionaries, and we add in silly little things like adding the year at the end of a word, or adding an exclamation point at the beginning of a word, or all these things that we think of to make it easier to remember our passwords. And I ran that demo for people, and of course, like summer 2019, 2015, whatever year it was, pops up on the screen, and like half the audience gasps because they suddenly see their password on the screen. And they're recognizing how this whole process actually works and why passwords are in danger in the first place. And we talked a little bit about how you can address that kind of a problem by not trying to make it more complicated, but just making it longer. By not using the most popular line from the most popular song that year, because that's probably going to show up on a dictionary, but maybe describe something in your own words that you can easily remember. And if you just modify a little bit, it's a lot harder to crack a long password that is in your own words than something that already exists. And I had really good conversations with people about that. And we actually moved the needle in that company a little bit. Later on at the same company, I was trying to think of ways to improve it again. And I think one of the other problems that I ran into at this company and just in general was that people don't look at security the way that security people look at security. When you talk to your parents, your family, your friends, your colleagues, different industries, and you point at a locked door, you say, how do you get through this locked door? And they're like, well, it's locked door. When they see a locked door, they see a wall, essentially. They see a barrier. That's it. It's locked. They can't get through. They view locked computers the same way. If they look at a computer and it's off, or they look at a computer and it's got a login screen, it's not a computer anymore, not until somebody logs in. So what I decided was I was going to hold a lockpick village for a bunch of non-security people. And I bought 30 clear locks. I bought the worst lockpicks that you can find on Amazon because I didn't have a budget. And I taught a bunch of game developers and project managers and lawyers how to pick locks. And every single person, when that first lock clicked, their whole expression changed. And it was like suddenly locked doors were no longer walls. They were levels of effort, which is how security people look at barriers. Is, well, it took me about this long to get through, or, oh, we'd have to do X, Y, and Z to get through the security boundary. And they started evaluating it that way. In fact, my crowning achievement, I feel, in that company was when the office manager came to me a few weeks after this and said, she said, I just got a purchase request for a lock cabinet to hold some hardware prototypes in, and I denied it because even I could pick that lock. And we found a different lock cabinet to put our hardware prototypes in. And we high-fived and did a little jig. It was super fun. But that's how we move needles at companies, right? Is we figure out what the actual barriers are, and we figure out how to attack those barriers. We as, I think we as security professionals, but especially offensive security-minded people or adversarial-minded people, our job isn't necessarily hacking, it's to reevaluate assumptions that we've always made. It's to look at problems differently or imagine what if. You know, what if that square wasn't actually a square, it was a circle? Well, that's stupid, it is a square. Yeah, but come with me on this journey and let's decide it's a circle and see how this changes the scenario. We can do that with things like security awareness, with having or not having offensive security at companies. So the next thing I did, this is the same company, the next thing I did is said, okay, well, this is great. I get to do some offensive stuff at this company, but I still don't have an offensive security team. I still haven't made the transition. I haven't made the leap. How do I do this? Well, this was kind of startup-ish kind of a company. They were post-buying, so they had, you know, money and whatnot, but they were still very startup, small video game industry company. And they had clubs at work, kind of like high school, you know? They had like almost after-school clubs. And I decided to make a red team club. And I specifically didn't really want security people in the club. I wanted project managers and release engineers and QA engineers and lawyers and things like that. In fact, I made a rule that only one security person could be in the club at a time, and we kind of rotated through every few months. But I got a lot of interest, specifically because I taught them how to pick locks, and they're like, wait, do we get to do more of that? And I was like, yeah, absolutely, let's do that. So we started meeting every other week, every couple of weeks at lunch for an hour, and we just talk about different things. I'd bring in RFID cloners, and I'd bring in you know, better locks for them to try. I actually got a little bit of a budget, a few $100s, and I ordered the same locks that were on the doors of the office and set up a little lockpick village. And we actually organized an engagement, like a full-on engagement. We wrote a statement of work. We pitched it to the director of security at the time. What we wanted to do was we wanted to evaluate the physical security of this company. We made hardware prototypes. We wanted to evaluate the physical security of the office and do a rough assessment of kind of how the physical security of the company was. We didn't own the building we worked in, so we couldn't actually pick those locks. First rule is don't pick locks that you don't own. Second rule is don't pick locks that you depend on. So we didn't actually pick the doors, but since I bought those exact same locks, we set up a series of locks inside of our office and said, you need to pick each one of these before we can actually get into the office. I taught them a little bit about how motion sensors at the entrance of big office buildings work, and we actually built a jig to slide a manila envelope through the cracks of the doors and waggle it around at the end of the stick and got in through the front door. And these office managers, these lawyers are the ones that actually came up with these ideas like, oh, how do we get a stick that extends that far? And how do we, you know, how can we reliably move it well enough? And somebody's like, well, what if we just put a balloon on the end of it? And I was like, yeah, that sounds great. Let's do that. And you start getting these people thinking about how to bypass security, how to get around different barriers of entry and get them engaged. So we carry out this engagement. We get into the office. I didn't pick any of the locks. I made them all do it. But we got into the office. One of them really took to lockpicking, actually. They texted me like a few months after I left the company, and they had just ordered like hundreds of locks from eBay. But so they got us into the office, and we started walking around, and we found numerous computers that weren't locked. This was after hours. This was on a weekend. Numerous computers weren't locked. We found a brand new hardware prototype that wasn't even like announced to our parent company yet, not in the locked cabinet. We found that we reviewed the security tapes later to see what could and could not be seen. And we found that there were several blind spots that would have allowed us to get in and out of the office with one of the hardware prototypes without being seen on the cameras. And since we picked locks and didn't use our badges or any clone badges, there was no record of who came in or who didn't come in. It was just, oh, well, that door was open for a little bit of time and now we're missing a hardware prototype. So we wrote up a report, a legit report with an executive summary and a series of findings and remediation recommendations. We described how we wanted to reset our different camera positions to provide better coverage. And we actually got a project to change up how the cameras were and redistribute them and get visibility set up better in the office. And that was all non-security people. Entirely. I had very little to do with it other than encouraging them and giving them ideas on how to plan this. And we got, once again, excellent security movement with really not an offensive security team at all. And that really started my journey down the whole, just applying adversarial techniques to non-adversarial situations and see what worked and what didn't. So having zero, and I mean zero, professional offensive security knowledge, I had won with a team. I was on a team. We won a couple of CTFs. I started a YouTube channel that had like 3s of viewers. And somehow somebody hired me to start an offensive security team. They said, hey, do you want to come to this company and actually start from scratch an offensive security team? And I was like, I mean, that sounds great, but do you want me to come and do that? Like, have you thought this through? And I accepted the position. What I didn't realize at the time, or I didn't fully internalize at the time, was that they were starting an entirely new security team. So there was a security team already at the company, but they were primarily focused on different areas of the organization, primarily compliance-related things, and there wasn't a whole lot of technical security at the company. So technical hire number 1 for the security group at this company was offensive security lead. Cool. What do? How do we, as an offensive security group, start moving needles, start a security organization, bootstrap other security functions, and not lose our souls, our identities as offensive security? Because I'm going to touch on that in a minute too. Well, the common landscape, and I'm sure a lot of you have experienced this in the past, is kind of pen tested security. So since it was just me, I couldn't actually start implementing anything. I was writing a lot of documentation at the time. We started hiring external consultants, come in and do pen tests, and just kind of continue that whole idea of pen tested security. So bring in somebody for 2 weeks, they tell you how your entire security organization is being ran and everything that's wrong with your company and everything's groovy. Well, I don't know about your organizations. That didn't work very well for us, but we kind of did what we could at the time. While that was happening, as kind of a stop the bleeding sort of a thing, start generating the concept of security, get product teams and development teams used to the idea of receiving security defects and working with security people to fix bugs in their code and whatnot. That was the initial stage of relationship building, while I started writing just a metric ton of documentation. And I think a lot of people skip this or don't place as heavy an emphasis on this as I think personally they should. I have been saved more times than I can remember because we had already had a documented mission or an objective or our rules of engagement, what we will and will not do, stating, hey, we're going to compromise the information security of these systems, but we're not going to socially engineer anybody, or we're not going to do this, or we are going to do that. Having that documented ahead of time does 2 things. One is when you're in the thick of it, you can refer back to it on whether you're on course or not. And it's like, hey, are we supposed to be doing this? I don't remember. Oh, we have it documented. This is great. The other thing it does is it quashes a little bit, not all of it, but a little bit of the fears of your partners. Because if you're starting something offensive in an organization, and actually, let me take a step back. Has anybody started an offensive security organization or club or function or anything inside their company? 1, 2, 3? Okay, so a few of us, and probably everybody on the live stream. So there's like, I'm going to imagine there's a few hundred of us. But for those of you who haven't, there is an awful lot of fear that these hacker kids are going to come and just start kicking over sandcastles and ruining everything and creating a ton of work for everyone. And the more documentation you have in place showing that you have already thought about their fears, considered what it would be like to be in their shoes, and how you're going to compensate for those issues, goes a long way to establishing trust and relationship with your users and your partners. And that is paramount, that trust. And I'm going to get back to that point in a minute too, because I have a whole other rant that I want to get to if we have time. So a lot of documentation. Program definition first. This was our stated team goal, like what we're doing, why we're doing it, what we're trying to accomplish, our values, what things guide us as a team, what we think is important, why we think it's important, what our general scope is, and what our general rules of engagement are. Because as offensive security group, we, by our very job definition, are going to break the acceptable use policy and our information security policy and a few other things, right? And you don't want to get caught doing those things without previous approval, because you could get fired or sued or lots of other things, right? Because that's why those policies exist, is to prevent people from doing it. So you have to document these things ahead of time and get approval so that legal knows and IT security know that you're going to be going a little bit counter to the grain. It was around, it was about 6 months down the road that we started getting onboarded the other security leaders. We pulled in AppSec next, application security next, and then we had a platform security team that's kind of our cloud security team. And they, being new to a company, take a while to onboard. And everybody freaks out when I say this, but it takes about 6 months to actually fully onboard to a company and be productive. They're like, no, it takes a lot, it's just way less time. It's like, okay, I want you to think about your first 6 months at any company you ever worked at and see how actually effective you were versus how effective you were the next 6 months. And it's, kind of hockey stick. So these leaders were getting onboarded, and I started working with them, kind of relaying what I've learned. Here's the documentation I've written. Here's where I think we should go next. And those conversations were really important, because being adversarially minded in an organization, I look at things less on what does the checklist say that we need to do next, which is very important, but my focus is really on, well, what am I going to try and get out of the company? It's not necessarily how much damage you can do. That's not really the way most adversaries think these days. I think that's a kind of a trope that we have from the 90s, where all viruses delete all hard drives and that's it. Usually it's gain information about something, gain financial leverage over a company, gain financial and gain just in general through ransomware or whatever, right? So we think about things a little more objective focused than checklist and standards focused. And so it's important to work with these teams to get their checklists hit, but it's also important to work with them saying, hey, I think entry 5, 6, and 10 on your checklist are the ones we should do first. Because, second question, who feels they're fully resourced to do the job they need to do at their company? Wow, are you guys hiring? Oh, okay, well, yeah, you work for John, fine. Show off. The rest of us mere mortals never get the resources that we need to actually do a job, right? So it's important, really important to prioritize. And what I've found trying to spin up these offensive security organizations is that working with OffSec is almost never a priority. It's almost never first on a checklist. In fact, I've yet to see a checklist that actually includes hey, spin up a red team. But we can provide that insight. We can say, hey, these are the big problems that we're seeing in pen test reports, in workflow diagrams, in threat models, things like that. These are the things that really kind of jump out at me when I'm evaluating where the actual gaps are, and this is how we can prioritize. Another thing that we ran into early on was we found some gaps, some issues in a couple pieces of infrastructure. And I had myself and another team member, and we had a couple other teams, but really we were the established team. We had, the actual bandwidth to get anything done. And the way we decided to approach this problem, these issues, was not necessarily as an architecture review or anything like that, but we said, we have OffSec resources, so we're going to do OffSec things. So we did an exploratory pen test. We said, hey, we've got some issues. We want to know how bad they are. So we're going to attack them and see how bad they are from an adversarial perspective. Were there more things wrong than what we found? Yeah, absolutely there were. But would we argue that the things we found and exploited and got into and the data that we were able to access was probably the most critical of it? 80, 90%. I mean, I don't think I'm perfect, but I think we did a pretty good job. So this is the first example, and we'll talk about more of this in a second, but this is the first example of attacking problems a little bit differently and thinking, well, with the resources that I have available to me, which is only offensive security, because we're the first team at the company, what can we get done while, again, keeping our identity as an offensive security team? And we wrote up a report. It was not the report I'm most proud of, but that's okay. As you're starting organizations, it's okay to start lean and grow, right? Find out what is important to the company, what's important to the team, what kind of information, what kind of report styles, what kind of formats. We iterated through, I have some of my team in the audience today, and we iterated through dozens of formats and different supplements and deliverables and things like that before we actually found that worked for the organization. When you're on an inside team, standardization almost isn't as important as just getting it to the teams that need the information in the way that it works for them, right? And so I know there's a lot of consultants in the room today, and I know standardization matters most because you're just trying to fly through as quickly as possible and do a good job. At least some companies want to do a good job. But for us, it was really about working with the teams to find out how they wanted that information and really like level up our reports according to that. And I will say that even though our reports started not great, I think that we started generating towards the end of it some of the best reports that I've seen in the industry, not including BHIS. Please don't mob me after this. Okay, so minor detour. I talked about this exploratory pen test idea, and we had a problem that we really only had offensive security resources, and we wanted to solve this problem in a way that we knew how that would make sense for us. I have found numerous times at numerous different organizations that offensive security people in general are fairly versatile. And that doesn't mean that they are experts in every field that they touch, but what I like to say is they become rapidly moderate in fields that they need, and then they immediately forget it. Or at least that's the way I operate, is like, I need to be proficient in this for about a minute and a half. I will deep dive it, and then I will move on. The problem is for like vastly under-resourced organizations, it's very, very attractive to try and steal those resources and just put them wherever you're under-resourced most. Oh, we don't need an OffSec team, but you're pretty good at cloud, so I'm going to make you work with the cloud organization for a while. Or, oh, you have a dev background, so now you're going to be in product engineering. I have a couple problems with that. First of all, being somebody who wanted to be an OffSec for so long, I didn't want to just abandon, like once I hit my career goal, I didn't want to just abandon it and do something else. But it actually speaks to a more business operations related problem, which is to say that if you're being compromised by an adversary, whether that's a friendly adversary or not, because of because you're under-resourced in certain areas, that is a finding. That is a business problem, and that is exactly what offensive security teams are there to do, is find gaps in various things. It doesn't have to be a technological gap. It can be a resource gap. So I advocate teams to lean in. I advocate teams to find creative solutions so that you can provide help to those organizations in ways that make sense with your job description and theirs. But that's also a finding. So you say, look, we wouldn't normally do this, but we'll lean in for a week and help you bang this one thing out. We're going to write this up as a finding, and we're not going to do it again. This needs to get fixed. This goes into your backlog, and if you're under-resourced, you need to get resources. Or you need to move resources around for people whose job description is to do this thing, because you're not utilizing the people that you hired in the way you hired them to be utilized. And that's just as important as us, having fun hacking stuff. So it's not just a personal feeling, it's really like a business problem that we need to help with. So it's around this time at the company, the exploratory pen test side was kind of a turning point for us. Like I said, we were getting other teams hired on. We were getting other teams hired on, and they were starting to build up and get their processes under their feet. And I decided that it had been too long before I started considering things like, you can call them core tenets or principles or values or whatever, but I started really thinking about what is important to us as an offensive security group, what is important to us in how we help the company grow and progress and be attractive to customers and keep our people safe, and really what's going to allow us to do our jobs. And so I wrote 3 kind of core tenets that we went back and forth on quite a bit, but I like them and I'm reusing them and I'm kind of sticking with them. So I want to share them with you. This isn't to kind of come down and like give you 3 offensive security commandments, but more just to share what really worked for me. So the first one, and this is the most important one, which is why it's tenet number 1, but we are partners, not adversaries. We are emulating adversaries. We are simulating adversaries. We are not adversaries. We work for the company. And I'm going to say something that is probably one of the most controversial things that I say often, and I say a lot of controversial things. If you work on a red team, if you are an offensive security professional, and you are not that very second on an engagement, you are part of blue team. If you're not actively playing an adversary at that exact moment, your job is to help the company be more secure. You are a partner, okay? So I'm aware of, and I actually really like, I don't know if you're familiar with April Wright's kind of color wheel where she introduced the concepts of like orange teams and yellow teams, where you've got the red and the blue team as the defenders and attackers. The yellow teams are the teams that build stuff, and then interacting between red and yellow and blue and yellow, kind of these other colors. It's super fascinating. I don't have the attention span for it. Like, I love it. I think it's great, and if you haven't read her paper on it, please do. But I don't have the attention span for it. So I just simplify that dramatically to where you're always blue unless you're red for a minute. Okay, so we're partners. The idea behind this tenet is a couple-fold, right? First of all, we shouldn't actively be doing harm to the company. We should be simulating harm being done. Sometimes unintentionally, a system will go down or whatever, but we shouldn't be like actually deploying ransomware and taking the company out for weeks at a time, right? So first of all, don't do harm. The next one is we don't betray the trust of our partners. Okay, we have to work with these people. We need to be working with them as if they're our colleagues and our peers, not the people that we are competing against. We work together. We work for the same company. Some people have equity as part of their compensation package, so you're literally shareholders in the same organization. Treat them with some respect. You have to work with them. Frankly, as an adversary, you're kind of there at, like, by their grace. Like, you're the outsider here. Most companies don't actually want or are very interested in having an adversarial team. So being as friendly as possible with your partners kind of extends your lifespan there. But ultimately just behave ethically, right? And I have a side rant, totally off the cuff, not planned at all side rant, about phishing. There's a lot of discussion on whether or not phishing education and phishing tests is actually useful at companies. We can debate that over drinks or something. The fact of the matter is, regardless of what your stance on it, it's required by a lot of compliance, so we're going to do it anyways. Now, if I catch any of you using physical violent threats, pandemic relief issues, financial issues, to trick your users and brag about it, I'm going to look at you very sternly. It's about all I have authorization to do. I can't really do much else, but I'm going to be very disappointed. That's not the purpose of this. The purpose of phishing education is to educate our users about phishing. It's not to trick them. It's not to brag about how many of them we got to fish. In fact, I brag about how few people we fish in our phishing education, because that's actually the metric we want. We want people reporting. We want people talking about it. We want people in Slack warning each other about different fish that come in. And if it happens to be our phishing test, great. That's the point of simulated fish. We want them to behave the same way they would normally. And we want our users talking about this, right? So this idea of like getting super excited about tricking our users, hacking our users, it goes beyond phishing and into red team and pen testing as well. But this idea that we're against our users has got to stop. And I will continue ranting about this until it stops. And I know because of the kind of crowd that John attracts, I'm preaching to the choir mostly here, but it's really, really, really important that we not only understand this ourselves, but we advocate it to other people. So we are partners, not adversaries. Rule 1. Rule 2 is a little bit more nuanced, is produce actionable results. And this comes in 2 forms. The first one is this kind of, it flares up every once in a while. I hope I don't cause a flare up from this talk. But the whole controversy about releasing offensive security tools into the public, and is it a good idea or a bad idea or whatever, I don't want to get into that right now. But when we generate findings, when we come up with new tactics, when we come up with new tools, we should be part of the effort to detect them, to fix them, to mitigate them. We came up with it. We're best positioned initially, because we spent so much time thinking about it, to figure out how it should be stopped. Again, our job is to help security at our organization, and hopefully wider security, not hurt it. Okay, so when we release new tactics, maybe a POC on how to detect it. You don't have to write their detection for them. You don't know how. You don't work in their detection group day in and day out, but you can say, hey, here are a couple identifying strings of this tactic, or this is a behavior that's kind of atypical from our tactic versus normal behavior. You can key in on this. So that's one nuance of this. The other nuance of this is how we plan the sophistication of our objectives, of our engagements. It doesn't help anyone if we know that a low maturity company is there without a security team, without a SOC, without full-time detection, and we roll in with nation state level tactics and tools and just stomp them and say, well, we stole all of your data, there's nothing you can do about it. That doesn't help anyone. That doesn't improve their security. All it does is just demoralize them and make them hate offensive security, right? So this kind of in tandem with we are partners, we need to make sure that we're playing leapfrog with our defenders and saying, hey, you're at a maturity level, whatever metric you use, hey, you're at kind of this sophistication level, we're going to use a bit above that, or what we think is a bit above that. Maybe we're surprised. Maybe they hand us all of our TTPs and say, better luck next time, which is great, because then we get to do new and interesting stuff. We get to do new research. But don't come in, guns blazing, kicking everybody over, and then calling everybody noobs. Work with them to figure out what objectives you should be working with, what objectives they're worried about, and then maybe submit some of your own, hey, I know you're really worried about this building over here, but have you thought about this wall lately? It's awful tall and rickety, and it can, land on your building someday, so we should look at that too. But really, work with them and don't overblow sophistication. That's another part of this actionable results. Make sure your work is actionable, not demoralizing. And then the last one, and this is, I don't view it very controversial, but this is very controversial with, I think, a lot of red teams that I've worked with, is default to transparency. I hear about and talk to other organizations where when they read out, they only read out specific findings. They don't talk about their covert channel framework or what C2 they're using or what IPs or domains they were using or anything like that, because they want to save it for the next op. Your job is not to be hackers. Your job is to help the company. So for an internal organization, and I'm not going to talk about external organizations because I know you all have businesses to run, but for an internal organization, give your defenders literally everything. If you wrote an entirely new covert channel that just blows the doors off of everything, don't worry about saving it for the next op. Give it to your defenders so they can defend against stuff like that. Because one, that's what you're there to do, is improve stuff. Two, how many people have worked at a company where you only had to report a finding once? And then they just fix it. You can reuse that TTP, it's okay. And the moment they detect it and the moment they shut it down, you get to do something new. Because reusing the same tactic over and over again, I don't know about you, but it's boring. I want to do new stuff. So our third tenet for me is default to transparency. Now, we don't give transparency during engagements, right? The whole point of an engagement is to carry it out, so it's not like we're giving them everything during the engagement. But once we're out, once we're reporting out, give them everything. Everything, every piece of code, every domain, everything. So those are my tenants. We developed those at this company around the time that we started kind of evolving our service catalog, getting out of pen test centric ideas and tactics. We started handing off a lot of pen testing as a gate to development off to the other teams, the application security team and whatnot. And we started thinking about what other types of services do we want to provide to this organization. We started looking at operations. And one thing that you'll hear a lot if you start or if you're evolving or if you're trying to implement a red team is, oh, we're not ready for something like that. Oh, well, we're really excited about that. We want to do something like that, but we're not ready yet. And they expect the conversation to end there. But the response should always be, what does ready look like? When will you be ready to face an adversary? When do we flip the switch on the internet to say, okay, it's all right to attack us now, we're set up? And that statement can come across a little bit flippant if you don't already have these tenets in place and have these relationships with your people in place, because you'll also hear a lot of OffSec people and adversary people say, oh, well, if you're not ready for a hacker, then you're not, you need to be ready, and it's just too bad, we're going to do it anyways. But again, our purpose here is to work with people and help people. So it comes out of a genuine feeling of, well, how can we help you get there? What does ready look like, and how do we get you there? And one of the things that we found was that we were just kind of worried about our visibility, right? So rather than jumping directly into full wide scope engagements and adversarial emulation and going dark for 6 months and just kicking the crap out of everything, we started planning out a few different tools. The first one was kind of adversarial threat model reviews. And it's almost exactly like regular threat model reviews, except you have OffSec people do it. And we did it over the course of 4 hours or so with the team that wrote them. And we just walked through, okay, this is what you were concerned about. How did you fix that? Well, did you think about this? What are the permissions on that file? Who can write to this position here? And you just really think about it as an attacker and say, well, if I was trying to get around this thing, what would I do? Did you think of that? We actually got really good results out of that. So instead of doing like 2-3 week engagements, we were doing like 4-hour exercises with teams and finding just as useful stuff sometimes, or at least more things than just here's a list of vulnerabilities. Here's some misconfigurations that we're finding in your environment. The other thing we did is not a new thing, but it's kind of what I call like discrete TTP execution. So things like Veridin and Atomic and Scythe do all this, but really just packaging a tactic, a procedure really, and saying, here is an attack that you can train your detection on. Here is a series of beacons that behave differently. We're going to deploy it in 50 different places in your environment, and we're going to tell you exactly what they are. Can you find them? Can you see them in your logs? Do you have detections for them? And that allows them, that gives them something to work on specifically of saying, instead of saying, is there an adversary in our environment? We don't know, we don't see one, so there must not be. Saying there are things in your environment to go hunt, to jumpstart kind of your threat hunting capability, and seeing if you can build out these, well, can we even see ICMP? Can we alert on ICMP beacons? Can we see HTTPS beacons? Well, we can see the beacons, but we can't see their contents. Oh, our proxies aren't working. Oh, they're getting around our proxies, et cetera, and allows them to kind of play against an adversary for a little while without having a persistent kind of a group. Because I've never been in an organization that says, oh, we're not ready for an engagement, and then 2 years down the road, they are. It's almost always, they're not ready, they're not ready, they're not ready. We finally do one, and it's like, okay, but like, I know you've been working the last 2 years. Did any of it apply to like what an adversary would actually do? Oh, no, we were filling out 853. And it's like, okay, that's great, but did you do it in a way that actually stops adversaries? Like, this is why we want to work together early. Now, it's at about this point in the in this organization's lifespan, we started doing adversarial emulation. We ran in a couple engagements. It went gangbusters. We found a lot of great stuff. We worked pretty well with the blue team, and I got approached to step into a new position as purple team leader. And that's when I submitted the abstract for this talk. because what I was really excited about was to talk about kind of the ramp up from offensive security as the first security organization at the company, all the way up to this fairly progressive, even though it's talked about a lot, there's not a lot of like deliberate purple teams, especially under an offensive security leader. It's usually like, oh, well, red and blue are under the CISO, so they're the same team, right? But this was under an offensive leader. Well, 6 months into that reorg, and there was another reorg, and that company decided they didn't want to pursue purple team anymore. So that's where this talk takes kind of a left turn. And as we close this out, what I'd like to do instead is talk a little bit about how I'm applying the things that I just talked to you about in my new gig, starting a red team at a company that's already established. It's already got a blue team. It's already got incident response. They're very excited about starting a red team. They approached me to start it. And kind of how did the things that I did kind of ad hoc and off the cuff, kind of by the seat of our pants, how would I do it fresh? And the answer is, the first thing I did is reach out to the defensive security teams. So the head of IR and the head of security operations, and even IT security, I started pinging them immediately. Like, hey guys, I'm writing this stuff. I want to know your feedback. I want to know what you think about it. What do you think about this program definition? Do you like these values? What do you think about the objective? And they're sitting there going like, what is happening right now? Like, we have our own teams to run. Why don't you just run your team? And it's like, that's not the way any of this works. We're here to partner directly with you. We may not report to the same people. We may not be on the same team, but we are on the same team. And so first couple of weeks, again, documentation. I'm starting with different documentation now, starting with the values immediately, because I've seen how much they help guide the team and what we do and how we communicate with people, was number one. The idea of general, or kind of like almost like an MSA for rules of engagement, of, hey, we're going to write rules of engagement per engagement as well. But just in general, while we're doing our own job, like, here are the exceptions to policies that we need out of the gate, because we absolutely are going to connect to non-managed systems, and we absolutely are going to try and bypass your EDR, and we absolutely are going to download questionable software. Like, that's kind of what we do here. You know, but it forced me to read through all of the policies, like all of them, and say, okay, we need an exception to this, we need an exception to that, we need an exception to that. Start reaching out to people who generally never hear from Red Team. They're like, why are you guys calling us? And it's like, well, I need your input on this. I need to know how this is going to work. Because the more integrated we are into a company, the more we're like finance or HR or any other organization that is literally everywhere in an organization, the easier it is to make changes. The easier it is to apply leverage in areas to help make positive change in the organization. Okay, so that's been my talk. No demos, which is kind of unusual for me, but this is a very important talk to me. It's been quite a bit of a journey, and I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope everybody learned something. Let you out a little bit early, try and get some coffee before the next talk. But if you see me in the halls, please stop, say hi. If you have questions, ideas, comments, I am always open to hearing about them. And thank you so much. Have a wonderful Way West Hackin Fest.